One of the most interesting comments that I've heard is from Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz is not a Trumper or a Trumpster, as Ray likes to call us. I call us Trumpites because it sounds more formal. Dershowitz believes Trump has a lot of problems with telling the truth consistently. But Dershowitz has a big streak of civil libertarian. I mean, he's a Democrat, but he is very much a civil libertarian and a constitutionalist. And Dershowitz has opined several times in a scholarly way, far more scholarly than yours truly, the implications and ramifications of what we're dealing with today. And if you want to hear somebody explain what is happening, as well as I've heard it explained, I've asked Rev to find the archive, the audio of Alan Dershowitz yesterday with MSNBC. And this is why, I mean, we've not even talked about this. It's after 7. NBC News had to retract a report that the FBI was wiretapping the phone lines of Michael Cohen and potentially had recorded conversations between he and Donald Trump. NBC reported that. Took about 3.5 hours for them to say we got it wrong. I've got a laundry list. I actually compiled a list earlier this week of things they've gotten wrong, and I was waiting on somebody to call in here and say Trump's a big liar. He lies no more than the media. I mean, his inconsistencies are very much in tune with how inconsistent the media has been on this. I mean, we remember, Don Jr. and WikiLeaks. Remember the market sold off because Flynn that day. I mean, the media has been just as dishonest. If Trump is a dishonest figure in this investigation, and he probably has been, then the media has been equally dishonest in their reporting. And the latest example of that is NBC News having to retract a story yesterday. All it is they're able to surveil who called and how long they stayed on the line.
Like phone records.
Yeah, I still don't understand why they can do that.
Right.
But that's the federal government at work. I find it very interesting. I find it very curious that when we're talking about this process, when we're talking about, whether or not they're going about it the right way, to give us opinions, we always have former FBI agents and prosecutors. In other words, let's get a group of people sitting at this expert panel to decide whether or not the FBI is following protocol and the Justice Department is prosecuting in the proper fashion. So let's go find people that have objective opinions, like former FBI officials and prosecutors in the Southern District. I mean, it's unbelievable that the public would even put any credence or credibility in these. But you know exactly what they're going to say. They're former FBI agents and they're prosecutors, federal prosecutors in most of the cases. But Alan Dershowitz is probably as scholarly about these sorts of things as anybody I've seen. And I'll be honest, in my time in politics, which is not a long time, 14 years now, in my time in politics and hearing Alan Dershowitz give his opinion on whatever the sentiment of the day is, I've disagreed with him far more than I've agreed. But the one thing I've always respected about Dershowitz is his strict adherence to the Constitution. He is a constitutional scholar. He is a constitutional professor. He is a civil libertarian. And he skewers NBC yesterday when he's asked to appear and talk about the wiretapping. And I think Dershowitz really puts it in a bowl that all of us can understand. And here's where a lot of the public are. When you ask about, Ray called much earlier, about the unpredictability of Trump, the chaos of Trumpism. Yeah, okay. But we believe there's a sincere motivation, and that is the government can't be trusted. Here's Alan Dershowitz.
Crime. Of course, I don't know what was in the warrant, and of course, I don't know what they're looking for, but it's the role of the civil libertarian to be skeptical and not to trust judges and not to trust prosecutors. If men were angels, as Madison wrote, we wouldn't need a constitution. We need a constitution because we as Americans don't trust authority. And we as liberal Democrats used to not trust law enforcement. Now it's the conservative Republicans that don't trust law enforcement and the liberal Democrats that are all saying, we trust law enforcement completely. The statutes are in place. The rules are in place. These rules are only as good as the people who enforce them, and only as good as the motives of the people who are behind them. And I have to tell you, I do not trust the government. I do not trust judges. I do not trust prosecutors when they are zealously seeking to go after a particular target, in this case, Donald Trump. Nobody would have been going after Michael Cohen if he weren't Donald Trump's lawyer. That's the reality. People don't investigate campaign contribution lapses or campaign law violations generally about people who aren't in the public light. And I just worry that when you have somebody with a target on his or her back, whether it's Hillary Clinton, who could have been elected and the same thing would have been happening to her, or Donald Trump, that civil libertarians ought to express concern. That's all I'm doing, is expressing concern and distrust of government. I don't want to live in the surveillance state, and I want to do everything in my power, no matter who the target is, to prevent excesses from occurring.
You're misrepresenting one thing, which is you're assuming this is a campaign finance violation that is the reason why we're here. But this wiretap required criminal conversations within recent months, long after the campaign ended. So you have to assume that there are other crimes that are being investigated that give rise to the wiretap. And the rest, I can't respond to the rest of what you're saying, because you're basically just saying that our criminal justice system is completely defunct and decrepit and should not be adhered to. And there's no response to that. If you don't trust judges, if you don't trust prosecutors.
Okay, but let's stick on that. Alan, let's just stick on that one issue then of the suggestion here that maybe this isn't just a campaign finance violation. What would you say to that?
It was Lavrenti Beria who told Stalin, "Show me the man and I'll find you the crime." You can go through the federal criminal code and find crimes that virtually any businessman, any politician has committed. Harvey Silverglade, a great civil libertarian, wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day, in which he described a game that prosecutors in the Southern District of New York used to play. That is, name a person and go through the code of criminal conduct and find the 3 felonies that they committed. It is so easy to get a warrant. It is so easy to persuade a judge to give you a wiretap warrant. That simply doesn't protect American citizens. And any civil libertarian who was exposed to what's going on here today, if Hillary Clinton were the subject, would be taking exactly the opposite position. There is so much hypocrisy, partisan hypocrisy out there. I don't mind if conservatives take the view we ought to trust government, or former prosecutors take the view we ought to trust government. My gripe is against civil libertarians, criminal defense lawyers, people who are always on the side of challenging government, the ACLU, that suddenly have lost their way and have forgotten what they have been preaching for 50 years because it's Donald Trump that they're after. That is the road to losing our civil liberties, when you allow our civil liberties to be compromised because you're going after one particular person. That's my concern.
And we have Tom Winter here as well, who has the reporting on this in time. I feel maybe this is a good time.
That is as in real time as the report was coming in that they had wiretapped Trump's lawyer's phone. That debate is kind of in real time at that moment when it was thought that. And you got a federal prosecutor there defending the prosecutor. You got a federal prosecutor defending the federal government. I think when you come to Trump, it comes down to one or two things. You either trust the government or you don't. And I think Trump has planted a seed of distrust in the American public that is warranted, valid, and very much needed. And to Dershowitz's points, it has always been the conservative Republican who believed in law enforcement, who believed in the justice system, who believed in the blind lady of justice. You know, the lady with the blindfold, balance the scales. I mean, everybody gets treated the same. That's not the case anymore. And I think Trump is the epitome of government gone awry and justice gone awry.
And as Dershowitz said, where is the ACLU?
Well, I mean, but here's what happened. It goes back to Andrew's comments earlier. Here's what happened. They found a guy in the White House that nobody wanted there. Nobody but us. Never forget that Donald Trump's election was validated by the American public. Whether you like it or not, it really doesn't make a rat's rear end. The Electoral College is how we elect presidents and have always elected presidents. And out of that Electoral College came a landslide. Donald Trump won in places that very few Republicans have won in recently, with a populist message. I mean, if you want to back up to the starting line, that's how we got there. A populist message resonated in places where people don't have political ideology and they'll kind of waver back and forth. They latched on to what Trump said. Nobody saw that coming. And this is not partisanship. And I think Dershowitz is making that very clear. This is not about a Republican versus a Democrat. This is what I've always said, Rev, and you've heard me say this since we've been on the radio. The great debate to come, the great political battle, will not be on the battlefield of ideology. It will not be a conservative government, a small government, a limited government, a big government, an intrusive government, a compelling government. It's not going to be that. We've landed exactly where I said we would land about 5 years ago. It is the average person in this country against the political elites. And Bob Mueller and Andy McCabe and Lisa Page and Peter Strzok and Jim Comey and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, they believe that's their government. They believe they're entitled to run the entity called our federal government. And we threw a monkey wrench in their plan. We sent a New York City street fighter, brawler, to the White House. And they're not only going to teach Donald Trump a lesson, stick with me, they're teaching us a lesson. Don't you ever try that again. Don't you ever send an outsider to our city ever again. This is our government. We run this government like we choose to run this government. And that's what Dershowitz is saying. You better be real damn suspicious of what your federal government is up to. You know, when I was a kid, and you see a police officer, law enforcement, you see an FBI agent, a CIA agent, that there was an immediate belief that that person had your best interest at heart. The federal government, not Donald Trump, the federal government and its bureaucrats, its elitists, its permanent class, they have squandered that trust we had in its federal government. And I think Dershowitz said, Americans by their very nature are suspicious of government. We must be suspicious of government. And government got so arrogant and full of itself that it felt it could do anything it wanted to do. And I believe, sincerely, Reb, that they thought Trump was somebody they could deal with in traditional fashion. I think they were so ill-informed about the kind of person they're dealing with. And I'll go back to the 6 o'clock hour. This is not about reestablishing conservative values in our federal government. This is not about making the government smaller and spending less money. This is a fundamental debate about whether or not the federal government represents the people who elect it. And we use the word in vernacular, deep state. There are entrenched career bureaucrats who influence our daily lives far more than we ever imagined. And they're being exposed. They're being exposed day after day after day after day. They thought she was going to win. And if she wins, we never know anything about Jim Comey. We never know that there were FBI agents already plotting a coup against this president. I mean, we've got text, we've got some emails, we've got a lot of correspondence between people in the Justice Department who were already planning a coup just in case this guy won. This is a monumental moment in American politics. And we want it to be about big government and small government, spending too much money or figuring out a way to curtail spending, raising the age of Social Security, figuring out a way to be more efficient in the way we spend military dollars. This is not about that. This is far more important than that. This is about whether or not your federal government is owned by a permanent class in Washington who have self-appointed themselves masters of that universe, or does it belong to we, the people? That is and you may find Trump to be indecent. You may find him to be vulgar. I've said on this radio show many, many times, I'd much rather have had Seattle Slewer Secretariat. But in this incredibly just and worthwhile cause, he was the only racehorse we had to extract some flesh from a group of people who once again have taken your government from you. And one thing Steve Bannon said that I'll never forget, if you believe they're going to roll over and give it back to you without a fight, you're sadly mistaken. So when Trump tweets, when Trump rants, when Trump does things that you scratch your head about, understand that's what we're fighting over. Ownership of our federal government. Back in a minute. Good morning, PD Live 95.